One morning, you wake up, look into the mirror, and suddenly don't recognize the person staring back at you. Not because you've grown older, not because you've become less attractive, but because there's something strangely empty in those eyes. That person smiles at the right moments, says the right things, does everything they're supposed to do, yet inside there is only silence. Like a house with every light turned on, but no one living inside. You can't even remember when you started changing. There was no single moment where you decided to become this way. It happened slowly, so quietly that you never noticed, losing one small piece of yourself each day. Until one day, you look back and realize the person you used to be is simply gone. This is not the story of someone with depression or someone shattered by tragedy. This is the story of ordinary people living ordinary lives that seem completely fine on the surface, while secretly losing themselves little by little without ever realizing it. And there's a very good chance this story is about you right now. Stage 1, emotional numbness. It doesn't begin with a dramatic breakdown. There are no shattered moments, no unforgettable scene burned into your memory. It begins on an ordinary afternoon when you hear a song that once made you cry, and this time, nothing happens. You sit there waiting for the emotions to return like they used to, but they never come. You tell yourself, maybe you're just tired today. Then you move on and stop thinking about it. That is the first sign, but almost nobody notices it. Emotional numbness does not mean you stop feeling everything completely. You still laugh when something is funny. You still get irritated when someone bothers you. You still feel hungry, sleepy, bored. But those emotions start becoming thinner somehow, as if there's a layer of foggy glass between you and the world around you. You can see everything, but you can't truly touch it. You participate, but you are never fully there. People going through this stage often describe it as watching their own life through a television screen. Everything is still happening. There is still sound, still color, still movement, but you are no longer inside it. You are only the one sitting there, watching. The dangerous part is how normal this stage looks from the outside. You still go to work on time, you still reply to messages, you still check on your family and friends. To everyone around you, you seem completely fine. Some may even think you are mature, calm, emotionally controlled. But that isn't what's happening at all. You are not controlling your emotions. You simply don't have many left to control anymore. Why does this happen? The human brain has its own survival mechanisms. When stress lasts too long, when you keep pushing yourself without real rest, when you constantly swallow your emotions because there is nowhere safe to express them, the brain slowly begins shutting down certain feelings so you can keep functioning. It is adaptation. But when it lasts for too long, you begin forgetting what it actually feels like to be alive. Some people remain in this stage for years without realizing it. They tell themselves this is what adulthood looks like. That growing older simply means becoming less emotional. That life is naturally dull for everyone, not just them. And so they keep living, keep working, keep smiling at the right moments, while inside everything becomes quieter and quieter. If you are reading this and something feels familiar, pause for a moment. Not to panic, but to notice. Because noticing is the first step. In this stage, even though it seems harmless, is where everything slowly begins to fall apart. Because when you can no longer feel yourself, you also stop hearing the inner voice that tells you where your limits are, what you truly want, and when it is finally time to stop. Stage 2, compromising yourself little by little. There's a question very few people are brave enough to ask themselves honestly. When did I start saying, "it's fine," to things I once would have never accepted? No one loses themselves in a single day. No one wakes up one morning and decides that from now on, they will betray what they believe in, ignore their own values, or become someone they once disliked. Nobody chooses that consciously. And yet, it still happens, slowly and quietly, so subtly that it becomes almost invisible. It begins with very small things. One moment where you hide your true feelings because you don't want to upset someone. One time you agree to go somewhere you never wanted to go because refusing feels uncomfortable. One evening where you pretend to be cheerful even though you are exhausted, just to keep the atmosphere light. Every time it happens, you tell yourself, just this once. And maybe it really is only once. The problem is that another moment comes after that, then another, and every single one has a reasonable explanation. Every compromise sounds mature, practical, understandable. You justify it with phrases that sound wise and adult, like, I should be more flexible. I don't need to be so rigid. Or, that's just life, you have to adapt. And that is exactly where the trap begins. Because compromise is not always wrong. Knowing how to adjust, how to understand others, how to let go of small things, these can all be healthy qualities. But there is a very thin line between healthy flexibility and the kind of compromise that slowly erodes who you are. That line is simple. Do you still know where your real boundaries are? When you compromise too much for too long, something strange begins to happen. Your boundaries start moving without you noticing. Things that once hurt you now feel normal. Things you once refused to tolerate are now brushed aside with a shrug. Not because you have become wiser or kinder, but because you have become so used to swallowing your emotions that you no longer recognize them anymore. Many people in this stage confuse compromise with maturity. They feel proud that they are no longer too sensitive like they were when they were younger. They tell their friends they've become calmer now, less emotional, less dramatic. But if they were truly honest, they are not calm at all. They are simply exhausted from holding too much inside for too long, until they no longer have enough energy left to react. The saddest part of this stage is that deep down, you still know. Somewhere inside you, there is still a small voice that remembers who you used to be, what you truly wanted, what you once refused to accept. That voice still speaks sometimes, usually late at night when everything becomes quiet. But during the day, you continue compromising. You continue surrendering little pieces of yourself. You continue making excuses. And every time you do, that small voice becomes just a little weaker. That is how a person loses themselves. Not through one life-changing decision, but through thousands of quiet moments of saying, it's fine, to themselves. Stage 3, living for other people. There's a question that sounds incredibly simple, but if you ask yourself honestly, the answer might shock you. What do you want today? Not what your family wants, not what your boss expects, not what society says you should do. Just you. What do you want? If you have to sit there for a long time and still can't find an answer, there's a good chance you entered this third stage without even realizing it. This stage does not begin with force. No one grabs your hand and demands that you live for other people. In fact, it usually begins with something beautiful: love. You want your parents to be happy, so you choose the career path they prefer. You want your partner to feel valued, so you always put their needs first. You don't want your coworkers to struggle, so you take on extra work even when you are already overwhelmed. Every one of those choices comes from a good heart. But when that becomes your only habit, when you no longer know how to choose for yourself anymore, that same love slowly begins consuming you from the inside. People living in this stage often share one very recognizable trait, even though they are usually the last ones to notice it themselves. They always know what everyone else needs, but they have no idea what they need personally. Ask them what their favorite food is, and they'll ask what you want instead. Ask them where they'd like to go on the weekend, and they'll say, anything is fine. Not because they are easygoing, but because their own needs have been pushed aside for so long that they can no longer truly feel them anymore. And there is a very real price people pay in this stage, because when you constantly prioritize everyone else, you begin carrying a painful mixture inside yourself: exhaustion, resentment, and guilt. Exhaustion because nobody truly sees how much you are carrying. resentment because you give so much and rarely receive the same in return, and guilt because you feel resentful at all, even though technically nobody forced you to do any of it. That cycle repeats itself endlessly, and every turn drains a little more life out of you. What makes this stage so difficult to escape is that society often praises people like this. They are called kind, selfless, thoughtful, dependable, and those compliments slowly become chains. Because every time you try to put yourself first, you fear becoming selfish. You fear disappointing people. You fear losing the love they give you, even though part of that love may have been built on the fact that you never say no. The truth this stage wants you to hear is simple. Loving other people and loving yourself are not opposites. You cannot pour water from an empty cup, and a person who has completely lost touch with their own needs can never fully be present for anyone else, no matter how hard they try. But before you can realize that, you first have to ask yourself the original question again. What do you want? Stage 4, losing your passion. There was once something that made you lose track of time. Maybe it was drawing, reading, playing an instrument, cooking, writing, or simply taking care of a few small plants on your balcony. It didn't matter whether other people thought it was important or meaningful. What mattered was that when you were doing it, you felt alive. You felt like yourself. Then one day, you realize it has been a very long time since you last touched it. At first, you tell yourself you're just busy, that adulthood comes with too many responsibilities, too many things to worry about, leaving no room for luxuries like personal hobbies. You promise yourself you'll come back to it next weekend. Then the weekend passes. Then the next month. Then the next year. And eventually, you stop making promises altogether. Because the truth is, you no longer even feel the desire to return anymore. Whatever once pulled you toward it, that strange spark, disappeared so quietly you never noticed it leaving. This is what many people fail to understand about losing passion. It is not like losing your keys, where you know exactly where you dropped them and can go searching for them again. It is more like colors slowly fading from a painting left under the sun. Day after day, little by little, until one day you look at it and see only the faint outline of something you barely recognize anymore. The real cause of this stage usually runs much deeper than simply being busy. When a person lives under constant stress, when their energy is drained by work, pressure, and the endless habit of taking care of everyone else like in the previous stage, the brain begins shutting down the parts connected to joy and creativity. Not because the brain wants to punish you, but because it is trying to preserve whatever energy remains for what it sees as necessary for survival. And to an exhausted mind, passion looks like a luxury that can be cut away. The problem is that when passion disappears, a very important part of your identity disappears with it. Because we do not only do the things we love for entertainment, we do them to remember who we are. The person who loves to paint remembers they are someone who sees beauty deeply. The person who loves reading remembers they are curious about the world. When those activities disappear, the mirror reflecting who you are begins fading too. Many people in this stage try returning to their old passions, only to feel disappointed because they no longer experience the same joy as before. So they conclude that they have changed, that those things no longer fit them anymore. But the truth is, the passion did not die. It is simply sleeping beneath layers of exhaustion and emotional numbness built up over years. And the clearest sign of this stage is not sadness. It is indifference. The feeling that everything is the same, that doing something or not doing it makes no difference, that having something or losing it feels equally empty. That calm, detached numbness may look like peace from the outside, but in reality it is often the sign of a soul slowly losing its fire. Stage 5, when the mask becomes the face. At first, you know you are wearing a mask. You know the smile you give your coworkers on Monday morning is not your real smile. You know the cheerful tone you use while talking to your parents on the phone is carefully performed because you do not want them to worry. You know the version of yourself that appears in meetings, family dinners, and social gatherings is not completely who you are. But that feels normal. You tell yourself this is simply how people survive in society. Everyone does it. And to some extent, that is true. Everyone adjusts the way they present themselves depending on the situation. But there is a massive difference between adjusting how you express yourself and completely losing touch with who you actually are underneath all those adjustments. Stage 5 begins when that line disappears entirely. It happens slowly over many years. You wear the mask long enough that your face begins to memorize it. You repeat the same familiar phrases so many times that they start flowing out automatically without thought. You react the way people expect you to react for so long that eventually you stop asking yourself how you truly feel in the first place. And then one day, you realize you no longer know how to take the mask off. Not because it is stuck, but because you are no longer sure there is anything underneath it. This is the stage where many people experience their deepest silent panic. Not loud panic, not screaming or breaking down, just a quiet evening alone in a room with no one left to perform for. And suddenly you have no idea who you are supposed to be anymore. You try to think about what you genuinely like and nothing comes. You try to remember what real comfort feels like and you cannot recall it. You try to hear your inner voice, the honest one that exists for nobody else, and all you find is silence. There is one small detail that people in this stage often describe. They begin feeling strangely exhausted after social interactions, even after spending time with the people they love most. Not because those people are unpleasant, but because throughout the entire interaction, they were constantly performing, monitoring every reaction, checking whether they were behaving the right way, adjusting themselves moment by moment without even realizing it. That invisible labor consumes enormous amounts of energy, even though nobody else can see it happening. And the most dangerous part of this stage is not that other people no longer know who you truly are. It is that you no longer know either. At that point, whenever someone asks what you think, how you feel, or what you want, you no longer look inward for the answer. Instead, you look outward. You read the room. You predict which response will be the most acceptable, and then you say that instead. That is the moment the mask stops being something you wear. It becomes your face. And somewhere beneath it, the real you is still waiting to be seen. Stage 6, paralysis of the will. You know you need to change. You know it clearly, completely, without any doubt. There are nights when you lie awake, staring at the ceiling, suddenly seeing everything. You see the life you are living. You see how far you have drifted from yourself. You see exactly what needs to change. Sometimes you even make plans in your head. Tomorrow I'll start over. Next week I'll change. This month things will finally be different. Then morning comes, and everything stays exactly the same. Not because you are lazy, not because you lack discipline, but because something inside you has stopped responding. It feels like trying to start a machine that ran out of fuel a long time ago. You press the button again and again, but nothing happens. And after enough failed attempts, eventually you stop pressing the button at all. This is the stage people misunderstand the most, both in themselves and in others. From the outside, it looks like someone who refuses to try, someone who knows the problem but still refuses to change. People give advice, they encourage you. Some become impatient and say things like, if you know what's wrong, then just do something about it. Or, you just need more determination. And the person going through this stage will nod and quietly agree. Yeah, you're right. Then they remain exactly where they are. Not because they don't want to listen, but because they have already repeated those same words to themselves hundreds of times. And those words no longer have any power left. Psychology has shown something important. Willpower is not endless. It is a limited resource, and it can become depleted. When someone has already passed through the previous stages, when they have spent years suppressing emotions, compromising themselves, living for others, and carrying the exhausting weight of a constant mask every single day, by the time they reach this stage, their mental energy is almost completely drained, and no one can rebuild their life from an empty reservoir. There is another sign of this stage that people rarely notice. Those experiencing it often become incredibly skilled at changing inside their imagination. They can vividly picture a different life, a healthier version of themselves, a future where everything is finally organized, peaceful, and under control. But the distance between that imagined future and real action feels like a massive canyon they have no idea how to cross. So they stay inside the fantasy instead, because at least there, change still feels possible. What makes this stage so painful is that it feeds itself. The less you are able to change, the less you trust yourself. The less you trust yourself, the less willing you are to try. The less you try, the more impossible change begins to feel. The cycle tightens slowly, day after day, and every day that passes without movement becomes more proof that maybe you truly cannot change after all. But this is the most important thing to understand about this stage. The paralysis of your will is not your true nature. It is the symptom of a system that has been emotionally exhausted for far too long. And symptoms can heal if you learn to understand the real cause instead of continuing to punish yourself for not being strong enough. Stage 7, becoming a stranger to yourself. There is a strange moment that people who have passed through all 6 previous stages can recognize if they stop long enough to truly notice it. It is the moment when they are sitting in a familiar room, surrounded by people they love, talking about ordinary things, and suddenly they feel incredibly far away. Not physically far away, but distant in another sense, as if an invisible wall of air has formed between them and everything happening around them. They hear the laughter, but do not feel part of it. They look at the faces of the people they care about, but cannot truly feel close to them anymore. This is the final stage, and it is not loud the way people imagine. Becoming a stranger to yourself is not dramatic. There is no explosion, no uncontrollable breakdown, no single traumatic event marking the moment it begins. It arrives softly, like fog. And by the time you realize you are inside it, it has already surrounded your life for a very long time. You still wake up every morning. You still brush your teeth, go to work, complete your responsibilities. But everything feels mechanical, as if some automatic system inside you has taken over, while the part that is truly you stands very far away, silently watching without the ability to intervene. Psychologists call this depersonalization, the feeling of becoming detached from yourself. It often appears after years of accumulated stress, emotional suppression, and living a life that never truly felt like your own. At this point, your mind is protecting you in the most extreme way it can, by separating you from your own experiences so you no longer have to feel the pain. But the cost of that protection is that you stop fully feeling everything else too. People in this stage often respond the same way when asked how they are feeling. They say, "I'm fine," or "I don't know." Not because they are hiding the truth, but because they genuinely do not know anymore. Their inner compass has stopped working. The part of them that once knew whether they were happy or sad, whether something felt right or wrong, whether they were okay or not, has gone completely silent. But this is the most important thing that needs to be said about this stage, and perhaps the most important message of this entire video. Becoming a stranger to yourself is not the end, it is the bottom. And hitting the bottom, no matter how painful it is, also means you are finally standing on solid ground. From there, you can push yourself upward again. The journey back to yourself does not begin with a massive life transformation or some dramatic overnight change. It begins with something much smaller: awareness. Realizing that you have drifted far away. Realizing that the person currently living this life is not the entirety of who you are. And realizing that beneath all the exhaustion, compromise, masks, and numbness, there is still someone waiting to be found again. That person never disappeared. They have simply been silent for a very, very long time. And sometimes, the moment you finally begin listening, they begin speaking again too.